Greetings, Judah. DFG here, Gideon's Flight. Hey guys, this message is going to be related to Veterans Day, my thoughts around Veterans Day, what I believe that Elohim has instructed us in relationship to what we now, or what America now celebrates as Veterans Day. Obviously, it's their holiday, but our people are recognized, talking about Israel, we're recognized as a part of those who contributed to those who have fought and served this country. In some cases, who have given up their lives in the defense of this country. Now, before I get into what I want to discuss, I want to qualify myself in this instance. I've served time in the military as a young man. I have 3 sons. All 3 for 3. And if you count me, 4 for 4, have spent time or served this country. 2, United States Army, 1, United States Air Force, and my youngest currently, United States Navy. My oldest son, who I'm about to go and visit on this Veterans Day, I'm on my way to visit him now. He's in a place called Hazelhurst, Mississippi. Now, I'm going to visit him today, not, to sit down and, and spend time with him, have great conversation with him, break bread with him. No. I am going to spend time in reverence of him because he is no longer amongst the living. And I will tell you that indirectly, his reason for not being among the living is because of severe depression that he was dealing with. Some call it post-traumatic stress syndrome that ultimately caused him to, take acts or make decisions that caused him to die from a drug overdose because of trying to deal with his depression. His depression was directly related to his military service. Let me be crystal clear. So I'm going to visit his gravesite today, this Veterans Day. And I bring that to your attention not for any kind of sympathy or empathy, but I damn sure bring it to your intelligence to tell you that I have a right as a father who has served, have 3 sons that have served, and has lost a son for serving. I'm entitled to my opinion about it. And if your opinion is equal to mine, if your experiences are equal to mine, and you want to challenge my thoughts around it, then I welcome you to do so. I'd like to hear what you think after I finish bringing forward what I believe Elohim has put on my heart to share it with our people in regards to whether or not we have his permission in our oppression, bondage, whatever you want to call it, to participate in the wars of other nations, especially nations that have been hostile to Israel, to his people, to the so-called Negro here in America, or for that matter, the so-called Negro who we know are Israel in the West. That includes Great Britain, Ireland, France, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, Norway, etc. And the hostilities that have been directed at our people, regardless of whether or not we supported their wars. Because none of these wars were our wars. We are reminded in the book of Corinthians, I want to say 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 17. It says, come out from among them, talking to us. Come out from among them, be you separate, says Elohim, and touch not the unclean thing, and then I will receive you. And what he was telling us, come out from amongst those who are unclean, those who, who do not serve the Yahuwah, Elohim, the Creator, our King, our Master. They don't serve him. They created their own gods that they serve. And they lived by the decrees of those gods, including white Jesus. But we were instructed to not participate, to come out. Don't be a part of it. And I can tell you there are different stories, biblical, and I'm going to give you some. Then I'm going to talk about the result of our participation in these wars. If we were truly to be there, did the end justify the mean? In other words, were the results beneficial to us as a people for participating? But let's start here where I'm going to go to the book of Chronicles. I want to say 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 9. And there's a quote there, from a verse of scripture there, a reminder from Elohim talking to one of our kings. And he tells that king, he said, the eyes of the Lord go throughout the whole earth, looking to show himself strong in the hearts of those who are perfect towards him. In other words, those of us who love him with all our heart, mind, and soul. Not perfection, but perfect in our love and our obedience to him. That we understand that our lives are here to represent his greatness. And when we fail him. When we live below, the law, statutes, and commandments, then we are living below his expectation, and he's displeased with us when we do so. And you had Jehoshaphat, and I want to say the other king, don't hold me to this, I don't remember his king, but they were conflicting. One of the kings joined up with the enemy of Israel. The king of Judah joined up with the king of one of the heathens to fight against Israel. And Yah condemned him for that, judged him for that, because he told them, you were not supposed to fight against your brother, for the heathen. Read about it again, 2 Chronicles. Might want to start reading about chapter 15 through 16, and you can review the story for yourself. You see how displeased that Elohim was for our people to join up with the heathen to fight against our people. Another example would be 1 Samuel with King David. When he was in exile, running from King Saul. He had been anointed king, but not a permanent king at that time. And he had journeyed up with the enemies of Israel. And he was going to fight against Israel, his own brethren. And Yah had to turn those generals who served that king, who David had aligned himself with. He had to get into the hearts of those generals to cause those generals to persuade their king, their heathen king, to run David and his men off. In other words, we don't want them to fight alongside of us. We don't trust them. They're not us. They have a history of fighting against us. Therefore, send them home. And the king, as these heathen kings always do, he turned on Joseph. He turned on David and David's men and sent them back home. We have served this nation in many, many ways. And every single time, not unlike our history. That's why our book is so important. Not unlike our history, these kings have turned on us. This government, those governments all over the world, used our men to fight their wars, and then when their wars were over with, they put our men right back into the same oppression that our men were facing prior to joining these wars. In our own naiveness, we're thinking that, well, maybe if we fight alongside them, they will see that we're equal and that we're deserving of the same credit, the same respect, and therefore they will end their racism and prejudice against us and accept us as one of their own. Well, obviously, if you know anything about American history, that was not the case. But let me not digress. David and his men were forced back. You can read that in 1 Samuel chapter 30. And it was by the goodness of Elohim that he used those heathens to reject David and his men. Because by the time they returned back home to Ziklag, their families were gone. Another enemy had came into camp. And that's what happens to us. You see, when we get distracted in the heathen's business, you better believe that Satan is going to be behind our back doing his business. And that's why Elohim tells us, come out from among them. Don't participate. Don't be a part of what they're being a part of. Because he's telling you, they will While you're over there focused over here, they're going to be over there destroying everything that you think that you're fighting for. They're going to be destroying it. And it was only because David was a strong man, a man who loved Elohim, a man who Elohim had saw the heart of him, that his heart was perfect towards Elohim. He wasn't a perfect man, but his heart was perfect to Elohim. That Elohim, gave him grace and mercy, that he was allowed to go with his men and reclaim that which was taken from them by the enemy. But none of that would have happened if David had continued to participate in the wars of the heathens. Elohim said again, come out from among them. Be you separate. Don't touch the uncleanliness of what they touch. In other words, don't walk their walk. Don't abide by their logic. Don't participate in their wickedness. And then he says, I will receive you. David was received when David was turned away. When David went back home to his family, to his kind, to his children. Without shedding the blood of his brethren, Elohim gave him grace and mercy again to go back and claim that which was his. I will tell you that when you start looking at, and I'm going to bring it current, or not too current, I'm going to slow walk you back to the present. When you look at, how David was restored, and you start to look at, how we have been rejected because unlike David, we stayed the course. In many cases, we were the determining factors inside of these wars of the heathens. When they brought us on to fight with them, whether it was the Revolutionary War, whether it was the French-American War, whether it was the Indian-American War, the Spanish-American War, whether it was World War I, World War II, Vietnam, the Gulf War, etc., we were the difference makers every single time. But what did we gain from all of that? Is the question. Because I will challenge this narrative. I'll ask you to think about something. If Elohim says he's not going to receive us if we don't separate ourselves, because that's what he said. If we are going to participate in uncleanliness, that's the ways of the heathen. If we're not going to separate ourselves from their behavior, from their wars, from their atrocities, then he is not going to receive us, meaning that we're going to prolong our own misery. And it will be hard for anybody in their right mind to argue the fact of that statement that I just made. That our misery, although we have fought alongside the heathens, that our misery was not only continued, but in many cases, it actually got worse. I mean, I'll take you to let's go with the Revolutionary War, the War of 1776. I've already given you the ancient wars with David and between King Josaphat and I can't think of the other king's name. It wasn't Ahab. It may have been maybe in Jehu or one of them. But anyway, you again, if you care enough, if this means enough to you, if you have enough respect about yourself to know your history and why it's important for us to understand that these so-called holidays don't represent us. And Elohim is not pleased when we align ourselves with those who are evil towards us and they perpetuate that evil, towards us in every way they know how. And Elohim said, okay, if you're going to choose them, then obviously you're not choosing me. You can't serve two masters. But let's bring it on back again to the Revolutionary War. That's the War of 1776. If you know anything about that war started over merchandise. Whether it was tea or whatever it was merchandise and it really was taxation. In other words, the colonies of Great Britain, felt that that Great Britain wasn't entitled to get bounty from them, although Great Britain owned those colonies. Great Britain had financed those colonies and had every right to tax those colonies. But like heathens are, there's no honor among thieves. So the thieves over here got mad with the thieves over there, and they started fighting one another. and the thieves over here were getting their asses kicked, and the wicked general of the thieves over here, the racist George Washington, felt that black men were not worthy to fight in his army unless they were slaves doing labor of manual labor for them, cooking their food, cleaning their clothes, digging their trenches, and wiping up their shit, I suspect. Now, if you don't believe me, go do your own history. Go do your research. That's what he thought about the so-called, black man here in America. Really, the Israelite. They weren't calling us that. They probably knew. He was a Freemason, so I'm sure he knew who we were. But he didn't feel that our forefathers, had the integrity, that we were cowards, that we didn't know nothing about fighting and we couldn't be trusted. So therefore, we were animals, we were beasts, a burden to him. 3/4 of what is it? 2/5 of a human being, according to their constitution. Right? 3/5 of a human being. Washington was a part of that Second Amendment that wrote us in as chattel animals. And this is after, he finally relinquished and allowed our forefathers into his army. And at the moment and only reason he did that because the British were kicking their asses, and the British were going through the slave camps throughout those colonies, and everywhere they won, they were freeing, our forefathers, and telling our forefathers if, they were liberating them, they weren't freeing them, they were getting them off them damn plantations, and said, look, if you fight for the king's army, whether we win or lose, we'll free you. We'll either free you here in America, or we'll take you back to Europe, and there we'll free you. And so a lot of our forefathers, because they wanted to be free, they fought on the side of Great Britain right here in America, under the promise that win or lose, they wouldn't be left behind, to suffer the consequences. When you listen to the Star Spangled Banner, and that's the French-American War, so I don't want to get ahead of myself, but that whole America the Beautiful song, the Star Spangled Banner, "Oh Say Can You See" by the Dawn Early Lights, that was written by Francis Scott Key, who, was standing on a ship watching America get his ass kicked, and he knew the reason why America was getting his ass kicked, because our forefathers were fighting on the side of the British. And he wrote us into his song, calling us a bunch of Highlands and heathens, and that we were a bunch of castaways, and that we deserved to be hung. So all you loyal veterans out there who want to whistle Dixie, I want you to think about what I'm sharing with you. Keep it in this context. But anyway, that's the War of 1812, but I'm still in 1776 right now. So when Cornwallis and the British started to kick ass and take names, and the so-called revolutionary soldiers started running and abandoning their post like cowards that many of them were, Washington was running short on men, and only then did he relinquish his I guess, what is this, his law or whatever it was, his decree that said blacks were not worthy to fight in his army. It's only then that he relaxed that and allowed or opened a way for our men to fight for them, for the colonists. And guess what? That turned the tide of the war. Our forefathers, so-called black men and women, were the reason why they were able to win that war. Now, whether they want to hear that or acknowledge that or not, don't believe their asses, they're lying. That is 100% true. Go look it up for yourself if you don't believe me. Go look it up for yourself. Do your own research. It's a fact. Your brother has studied this out a long time ago. Before I knew that we were Israel, I knew that. We were the reason why American Revolution turned out to be a success. And what were we rewarded for our service? Many of our men were sent right back to them damn plantations. And then when they came up with their declaration or constitution, they wrote our ass right back onto them damn plantations. And even when some of the states like New York, Connecticut, New Jersey decided to start freeing our people, they still kept them in serious bondage and had all kind of black codes that denied access for the same things that whites could have in America. Even when it came down to celebrating their so-called Declaration of Independence, when our men and women who were men and women free were considered our so-called free men and women of color, is what they were calling us at that time. When we tried to celebrate Independence Day, we were arrested, in some cases beat, and in some cases even hung for even participating in their damn Declaration of Independence. That's how much they appreciated our loyalty. They wouldn't even let our forefathers have guns. Why? Because they wanted to keep us under their foot. And I believe, again, it was Elohim's judgment to us, because had we not participated in that war, maybe Elohim would have caused them to get their asses kicked, and maybe then he would have relieved us, because we would have come out, we would have shown that we could sustain, and that we would not participate, and that we could separate, and that he could trust us, and then he would have received us, and I believe he would have restored us. Example number 3. I already given you Jehoshaphat's war. I've given you David's battle. I've just given you Washington's battle. Oh, and by the way, those soldiers who fought for Britain, when they got back to Europe, you know what Great Britain did? Sent their asses to Sierra Leone. Sent most of them back to a country in West Africa that was so hostile to them that they put most of them back on slave ships and shipped them right back here to this country, and they became bondsmen and bondswomen. And also, their lives were so horrific in Sierra Leone, they would have been better on the same damn plantation that Great Britain claimed to liberate them from. And for those blacks who are the Israelites, so-called blacks, who were allowed to stay in England, go look at England's laws of racism. And guess what? England did not end slavery to the early 1800s, like 1808, 1810. That's the whole thing with, what's his name, was fighting over. William Tinsdale, I think is what he was named. The whole thing around Amazing Grace and all that whole thing was it's not Wilberforce. William Wilberforce. They had to fight years after the Revolutionary War just to free our people right there in Great Britain. So that was the reward for those who went back to England with them, who fought on the side of the British. They still were treated as slaves and chattel and animals. Many of our people in Great Britain today are still being highly discriminated. Racism is at an all-time high in Great Britain. You see how they treated Meghan and her little baby. Not that I give a shit about Meghan, and that little biracial devil, son of hers. But that was a reward for them. And then again, the War of 1812, when we fought for them. Again, when that war was over with, they took and shipped our men right back to those damn plantations where we had come from. You go back and look at American history. When were we liberated? In the early 1800s? 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, 1850s? Hell no, we were still slaves. And even when some of our men broke the chains of slavery and escaped northward, what happened to them? Go back and research the Dred Scott case. Judge Taney, William Taney. Funny these Williams keep coming up. What did he say? There were no laws written in the Constitution of America, this is 1850, that the white man had to respect in regards to the so-called black man. And he shipped Dred Scott black ass right back across that dam, but that was the whole Missouri Compromise. Sent his ass right back to the plantation from which he had liberated himself from. That was the rewards of fighting for these heathens here in America in the War of 1812. Now let's go to the Battle of New Orleans. Fought right here in Louisiana. Andrew Jackson, one of the worst mass murderers that ever walked this damn planet. He slaughtered so many Native Americans, it's not even funny. And most of those Native Americans look just like you and I. They were copper color Aboriginal people here long before the Europeans came. Go back and look at your Webster Dictionary, 1828, definition of an American if you don't believe your brother. He slaughtered them. That's what the whole Trail of Tears were about. Red Cloud, Sitting Bull. All of those great chiefs were slaughtered. Their people were given blanket with smallpox by these same wicked heathens who had used many of these men to fight on their side again against Great Britain. Many of our ancestors fought in the Battle of New Orleans. We were the reason that the Battle of New Orleans was successful. There's a place right down here called Chalmette Battlefield. If you haven't been, if you can go look, go visit. If you can't visit, Google it up and see what it was about. And you can see triumphant after triumphant after triumphant, where our people from Louisiana, Mississippi, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, even some from old wicked ass Texas, fought to keep America free. And when the battles ended, they again sent our people right back to those same goddamn plantations. And if they weren't on plantations, they were subjected to the same vicious Jim Crow, black code, not Jim Crow, but black code laws. Black man couldn't be a public official. Black man couldn't own a weapon. Quite frankly, most of them couldn't own property, couldn't get loans. If they did have property, they got it ripped off. Many of our men after the War of 1812, they went west, thinking that maybe if we go west, we can get away from these heathens. And maybe they would leave us alone. But you know what those heathens did? I'm talking about the Europeans, right here, so-called Americans. They went out west and they took the land back, claiming the grandfather clause. And if you don't know anything about the grandfather clause, look it up for yourself. But I'll give you a quick overview. The grandfather clause was simple as this. If you were a landowner at the time that America was moving west, if you were a landowner, they can come and they can confiscate your land, take it from you, claiming that except your grandfather owned that land, you were not entitled to ownership. And they stole the land from many of our ancestors. So when you want to talk about us being denied generational wealth, for all you racist bigots who talk about the black man should have pulled himself up by his own bootstraps and all he does is whine and complain and make up excuses of why he's in the situation that he's in, then you need to learn something about history, dumbass. Our forefathers had land. Your forefathers connived with the government and its Gatling guns and its weapons of mass destruction called smallpox and diseases, and they pretty much wiped our people out if they did not succumb to their vicious laws and mandates and thievery. And they stole it back from them by using wicked ass laws like the grandfather clause. All right, let's keep it going. Let's go to the so-called Civil War. The War of 1861. What do they call that? The war between the states? Again, North was getting their asses beat. Why? Because Lincoln thought black men were too cowardly to fight. They were too dumb and stupid to fight. I'm talking about Abraham Lincoln. Your so-called white emancipator. Many of you still got his picture up on your wall. I think I'm going to take that damn picture down. But the picture ain't up there because I thought he was liberated. It was about successes, but I got it from a accessory store, but I digress. I'm going to take that damn thing off my wall. I'm just convicted myself, praise y'all. But anyway, that vicious racist, yes, Abraham Lincoln was a racist, a bigot, 100% thought that the white man was superior to the black man, and that in his own writings, if you don't believe it, look it up. Hell, if you live near Washington, D.C., why don't you take a ride over to the Washington Monument? The Lincoln Memorial. And go downstairs, the area where you can't see, where the restrooms are. And read his writings that are posted up on the walls there. And guess what you're going to see? Letters where he said he didn't give a damn, if black men stayed free or they stayed slaves. All he gave a damn about is winning the war. And if keeping black slaves would win the war, he would happily do it. The war was not fought for you and I, my brothers and sisters. That's the lie these historians told, that it was about ending slavery. That's a lie. It was about the saving of the Union. America had become overly populated, and quite frankly, it had become industrialized. And because it had become industrialized, it needed more territory. And the South, which was still agricultural at that time, was stronger financially. It had the 5th largest economy in the world, the South. And when America decided that it needed to go west to steal our land, by the way, from our native forefathers, and give away land through the Hampstead Act and other acts, giving away land that we owned to white immigrants, let me be crystal clear, and settlers who were here, colonizers who were here, colonies, colonizers, same word. When they decided to go west, the South was going to go west too. But Lincoln, understanding that in order for America to continue to grow economically, they could not allow slavery in those western states because it would not have benefit industrialization. The banks, the big banks, were not going to have it. It could not monetize that. The money would have stayed with the southern elite, the southern, what do you call it, aristocrats. So he said that, hey, y'all can come, but you can't. These states are going to be non-slave states. And the South, said, oh hell no. Senators like Calhoun from I think he was from Kentucky. Look it up. They pretty much made it clear that, hey, not only are we going to go west, but we're bringing our slaves with us. And yes, slaves will be part of, it will be legal in those states. Lincoln and his administration said no. And then the South said, well, hell with y'all then. We'll go without you then. And Lincoln said, I'll be damned if you will. And then the heathens started killing the heathens again. They declared war. Or at least the North declared war on the southern states. Well, first of all, the southern states decided to become their own Confederate states of America, and decided they were going to go independently. They were going to use the Constitution that says that the national government could not enforce state laws on states that could not hinder state rights. So therefore, those states felt like they had a right to farm on their own country, since this country had denied them their rights, and they became the Confederate States of America. And then Lincoln, pretty much declared war on their asses. Had nothing to do with slavery. As a matter of fact, let's keep it clear here with history. Lincoln, there were states like Maryland, states like I want to say Kentucky, Illinois. Who else? That stayed loyal to the Union. They did not leave the Union. And guess what? Lincoln told them they could keep their slaves. That's your great emancipator. So all you veterans of foreign wars, or veterans, whatever you want to call your damn self, that's what your great emancipators thought about us. So if you stayed loyal to the Union, then as far as you were concerned, slavery was good, just as it was. He wasn't going to change a damn thing, nor did he. And when he did pass the so-called Emancipation Proclamation, he passed it for the states that were in succession. In other words, the states that were no longer a part of it, they weren't even recognizing themselves as a part of the United States anymore. So they had their own president, their own legislative, judicial government system. So he had no power where he pronounced, the end of slavery. And he knew it. He knew it. It was just another con game, to play, to use us as a pawn. Patsies, for lack of a better word. To make it appear to the South that, they could now trust their slaves because their slaves were revoked, because after all, they're free. There wasn't a Southerner in the Confederate States that got freed from the Emancipation Proclamation. But Lincoln, again, decided that they were getting their asses kicked. And what did he do? He started allowing blacks to fight. Go watch the movie Glory. The movie Glory with Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman. That story kind of gives you some real good insight on how that all went down. And if you watch that, you'll see the Union soldiers calling out people niggas and telling them to go back to the plantation. And where we did go down south, like South Carolina, we were called contraband soldiers when we were liberated, and pretty much treated as just a house, just to help. Cleaning up, digging trenches, cleaning up behind them, women, their mistresses and what have you. And anytime any of the so-called contraband freed, black soldiers would try to exercise any of the rights that their so-called liberators had afforded them, the men were whipped, shot, killed, maimed, you name it. So there was no liberation there. But yet when we joined up with the Union, guess what? Lincoln went from losing the war to winning the war. The reason why America is America today is because of our ancestors. In both instances. I'm talking about the Revolutionary War. We made the difference when we fought for Washington, and we made the difference when we fought for Lincoln. And neither one of those two vicious devils had the decency to do anything for us when those wars ended. Now, I know some of y'all are going to say, well, you don't know that because Lincoln was assassinated. Well, his administration wasn't. And yeah, they passed, what they would call the, the Reconstruction Act that lasted all about 8 years. They didn't let us come north. They put Union soldiers, all of the black men and women after that war was ended that were down south, the so-called slaves, were forced to stay south. They were forced to stay here, right here where they were. And there was a Union army put in place that was supposed to be protecting us, but the truth, that Union army was there to suppress us, to make sure that we didn't migrate north, because those Northerners did not want our ancestors mixing up there with them. But let us continue. Not only were we not liberated when the war ended, we were put right back on those same plantations that we were liberated from 8 years later, when the so-called Union soldiers, in a backroom deal with their white so-called Union, we had Unions in a backroom deal with their so-called white Confederate brothers. They weren't so-called, they were their brothers. Made a backroom deal that ended the Reconstruction, and guess what? Brought about the most vicious oppression of our people in the history of our people being here, and that includes even during slavery. We were slaughtered in race riots from Memphis, Tennessee to New Orleans, Louisiana, and parts beyond. They slaughtered, they killed some of our people who had been put in these, little pretend political offices, governors, mayors, police, sheriffs, things of that nature. They were slaughtered and thrown right back on plantations as sharecroppers and treated like shit and kept there. And if any of them tried to resist or to liberate themselves, they were killed. Then they passed the 13th Amendment to make sure that if any of our people tried to resist the oppression that came after we helped liberate this country, after we made America whole again, so-called great again, wink, wink, great for who? But after we made America great again, whole again, you know what they did? They passed laws that said that any crime that was committed by an American, then if they were emancipated or they were freed, so they meant us, they could be put back in chains. That's your 13th Amendment. You were free except you broke the law. And what kind of laws? Pig laws, vagrant laws, black codes. In other words, loitering laws. If you're vagrant, if you didn't have a job, that was a crime, so you went to jail. If you stole a pig, you served 5 years in jail. I'm talking about some of the most vicious laws you can imagine. And then they sent us right back to those same vicious slave owners who now are more vicious than they ever were during our years as their property. There's another book called Worse Than Slavery. Go read. It talks about the prison system and how it came into being, how it came into existence, and how oppressive that was to the so-called, black man. Again, the book is called Worse Than Slavery. Look it up. Get it on audiobook. I can assure you, once you listen to that book and read that book, you're going to be in tears. This country has never been worthy of our people fighting for them. Ever. Now that's your Civil War history. Let's take it up to World War I. I talked about the Spanish-American War. Again, you can look at the laws that were in place in the early 1800s and the birth of a nation, how they used propaganda to more or less slaughter, hang, murder our ancestors. There's a book called Without Sanctuary. It's a photo of all the lynchings and the burnings of our people in the early 20th century here in America. Again, Without Sanctuary. Go get it, read it, look at it. If you follow this channel, I've shown you portraits, photos from the early 1800s, the early 1900s, 1920s, how they were lynching and beating and murdering our men and women for any kind of resistance against oppression. The stories of Rosewood, the stories of Greenwood, Oklahoma, better known as the Black Wall Street. Go read up on that. And you can see what the War of 1812 and the World War I accomplished for our people. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. We died, shed blood on foreign soil, only to come back to this country and be treated worse than their damn animals. Worse than a mule or a horse. Worse than a pig. Again, American history for you. Fighting in their wars. What did our book say? Come out from among them. Be you separate. Touch not the unclean things. Then I will receive you. But let us not stop there, my brothers and sisters. Let's go to World War II. Oh, yeah. We were there. Oh, and by the way, in World War I, we were fighting on the side of America, on the side of the French. And you know what American soldiers were doing to our men? American soldiers who they did not want the bunker, that they had us segregated. We were not entitled to the same food, the same facilities. Hell, we couldn't even go take a shit where they took a shit at. This is in World War I, while we were fighting abroad to keep America free, to free France, to liberate the world, to keep Germany at bay, to keep democracy. They were shooting our men in the back, sabotaging our men, American soldiers. Go read about it. It's a fact. And they were putting us in the worst battles where the gas and the violence was so strong that most of the time our casualties were 60-70%. While they were in the back, in the rear, hiding, drinking coffee around campfires, singing old great battle hymn songs, while we were out front dying, getting slaughtered. Now let's come on back to World War II. Many of our forefathers went to Germany, went to Northern Africa, France. Wherever there was a battle, we were there, fighting, for democracy. When we had no democracy right here in America. Segregation laws, Jim Crow laws were at an all-time high in the 1940s. Hell, they were treating German prisoners of war better than American soldiers right here in America. That's a fact. If you want to see an example of it, a soldier story. Go Google up the movie A Soldier Story. I think what's his name? His last name is Rollins. He played in The Heat of the Night. A lot of good actors was there. God dog it. I can't. There were several others, but it's called A Soldier Story. And you're gonna find that they couldn't even, our soldiers here in America They were German prisoners of war who were able to eat in white restaurants in the South, where many of our troops were stationed, that black soldiers were not allowed to come in for a meal. And we were fighting to keep them free. And they were treating the enemy soldiers, Hitler's soldiers, they were treating them, giving them more respect than their own so-called brothers, veteran brothers. How the hell should we be celebrating these days, this Veterans Day? And I've given you now, I don't know how many examples. Hell, I stopped counting. How are you a veteran? How are you recognized? How are you honored when they always did nothing but dishonor you? And you still haven't learned. Many of us still have not learned a clear lesson. They hate us without a cause. They hate us because of who we are versus who they are not. And not only that, when the war ended and our soldiers came back home, they were promised, as all soldiers were, that they could get free low interest government loans, that they could go to school, go to college, further their education. They could get housing loans, that they can buy homes at a very, very cheap interest rate. American soldiers were afforded that for their loyal service in World War I. Do you know that the black soldiers returning, especially down south and many northern states, were denied those same loans? Although they had fought in the same wars and died in those same wars, shed blood, were injured, wounded in those same wars. Yet when they came back to America, racism said that they could not have access to any kind of loans such as the government had afforded the white soldiers who had returned. And do you know that having loans and in education to be able to learn trades and different skills, going into law, finance, etc., created generational wealth for whites that our forefathers were denied, which created perpetual poverty for our people that we are still dealing with today, that they have never taken responsibility for. They don't even want to acknowledge that it happened. And the minute we say reparations, you guys need to pay what you owe. Well, I ain't had nothing to do with that. I wasn't born then. I'm not responsible for what happened 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Well, are you responsible for what your grandpa did, Nick? Devil? And I could use the N-word to describe them. Are you responsible for what your grandpa did? Did your grandpa leave anything to your mammy, your pappy, that they're going to pass on or have already passed on to you? Because that's how you got it. Your family owned their own businesses? Because we couldn't get business loans. Although we had paid and shared the same blood that your whiteness got you access to, that our blackness was denied us of. Veterans. Am I lying? Should we go back and revisit critical race theory? Should we not talk about these things? Should we stay ignorant and dumb it down so you can feel good about your wickedness and the wickedness of your forefathers? And when that wickedness was directed at us, and it's still being perpetuated against us? Look at the prison industry. If you think slavery ended, then you tell me why 68% of all prisoners in the United States are so-called black or Hispanic, which in most cases is still black. 60%. When blacks and Hispanic don't make up any more than 26% of the population, but we damn near 60-70% of the prison population. In other words, those who are still slaves. But you want to tell us that slavery ended a long time ago. Really? But again, I'm not done yet. Let's go to Vietnam. Oh yeah, proportionally, blacks were representative of the majority of the soldiers who were fighting, who were in the fight, who were in the mix, who died for this country. Disproportionately. Something like, at that time, 6% of the population maybe 3% that were of age to fight, yet they were getting 60, 70% of the casualties. Not because they couldn't fight, it's because they were the ones who were sent in the most heated battles, while the officers, those of the privileged class, stood in the backdrop in safety of their camps, their boundaries, while we died. And when we came back to America, did we find the conditions in America welcoming for us? Hell no. Our men came back to the same job, lack of job opportunities, lack of access to higher education, lack of forced back into the ghettos, no medical help to deal with, you know, the mental illness that happened by being put in those kind of situations, seeing blood and death and mayhem, all to so-called end the spread of communism. And now old Joe Biden and his administration are on a fast track to take us right there. But that's a video for another day. We were treated like garbage, sent right back to the ghettos of America. Housing projects, you know, corners, and we became alcoholics. Many of our men were introduced to heroin in Vietnam because they could not deal with the conditions, the death, the murder, and the mayhem without the proper medical treatment, without service provided them to help them get off the drugs. We were sent back home. Our white soldiers were afforded, you know, all kind of rehab programs, but not our forefathers. Our forefathers were left to deal with their addictions on the streets of Harlem, on the streets of New Orleans and Baltimore and Washington, D.C. and Charleston, South Carolina and Newport, Virginia, Boston, Massachusetts, Roxbury, Massachusetts, Harlem, New York. I think I said that already. The Bronx, Brooklyn, St. Louis, Missouri, Los Angeles, California, Compton, California, Houston, Texas, Chicago, Illinois, Memphis, Tennessee, New Orleans, Louisiana, Jackson, Mississippi, Birmingham, Alabama, Louisville, Kentucky, left to come back home mentally deranged, not able to support their families, and then resort to violence, which ended up getting them back in prison, and in some cases murdered in these damn wicked streets or dying of drug overdoses. Those who were not fortunate enough to be incarcerated. What a shame. That's your American appreciation for the black so-called veteran. And then the Gulf War, where my son served, my oldest, who's now 6 feet under, were pushed into these situations, you know what I'm saying, in these deserts in the Middle East, and forced, you know what I'm saying, to survive and to submit themselves to all kind of chemical poisons that caused him not to be able to sleep at night when he returned home, caused him to have, what do you call this? You know, when they start to see things, you know, that are not there, and etc. Oh, and also drugs. To end up losing his life before he was 30 years old. And you know what, America? We had to fight 5 years just for these wicked devils, just to honor him by a tombstone. Just for him to get a tombstone. We had to fight with them for that said that he served for this wicked ass country. 5 years we had to fight with the federal government just for him to be honored with a damn tombstone. And you think that somehow or another Veterans Day is something that we should honor and respect as Israel, so-called Negro men of color. I say no, never. I say that we should have obeyed Elohim. Because I suspect, had we not fought in that civil war, Elohim would have let enough of them die. There wouldn't have been enough of them to re-enslave us. Had we not gone overseas and fought for them in France, there wouldn't have been enough of them left to come back here and reinforce Jim Crow laws and black codes and all these other kind of segregation laws. Had we not fought in World War II, again, not enough of them left to come back here and deny us, grants and access to government benefits that were awarded their white forefathers. To deprive us of those opportunities, and therefore we would have had generational wealth. And these ghettos that we're in would not be where we are concentrated in anymore. Had we been obedient and hearkened to the laws of Elohim, our great-grandfathers would not have a grandfather clause applied to them and had their property stolen from them. So when our book tells us to come out from among them and be separate and touch not the unclean thing, and then he will receive us, that means something, sisters. That means something, brothers. And for all you dear sisters who have fought right alongside of our brothers, everything I said applies to you too. You are courageous. You are brave. You are loyal. But they were wicked and cowardly and dishonorable. So don't let them pigeonhole you into some false sense of appreciation, some false sense of gratification, when they won't even compensate you for the misery and the pain and the stealing of wealth of our forefathers. We say, give us a check. Dr. King said America owed us a check. They blew his brains out. Malcolm said, give us land and freedom, or I'm going to take you before the United Nations. They had our own people blow his chest out. We say today, cut the check. And they tell us, what check? We don't owe y'all nothing. Obama was your reparations. So no. It's time for us to come in and be obedient. Let them fight. This next war that's coming with China, sit it out. If you're in the military, once you finish your obligation, you need to don't re-up, don't reassign. Get out before you die and your children be parentless because of your so-called loyalty or desperation. Well, ain't nothing else I can do, DFG. There ain't nothing for me to do there. Ain't no jobs. Well, you know what? See, that's your own mouth speaking your own demise. What our book tells us, by every word that a man speaks, he's going to give account for it. By your words you should be condemned, and by your words you are justified. Whatever man speaketh out of his mouth, so is that man or woman. Why are you speaking fear? Why are you speaking death and condemnation to yourself? Why don't you just believe that Elohim will receive you and restore you? Bring back to you everything that the cankerworm stole from you. The cankerworm, these wicked ass heathens. So I will restore and give you everything back they stole. If you let me receive you back, if you separate yourself and come out from among them. That's the solution. That's how you take it back. That's how we get it back. But we can't come back to Elohim unless he say, draw close to me and I'll draw close to you. We have a history of lesson, a great history of lesson of what happens to us when we turn our backs on Elohim and serve the gods of these heathens in the name of their fathers. We've never been Americans in this damn place. Well, not since they arrived. And we never will be. They don't see you as their equal. They see us as their weapon tools, their tools to use until it breaks, and then they destroy us. Then they go find more of us and do the same thing because we seem to never learn. It's time to come out, my sisters and brothers. No, we don't do Veterans Day anymore. America, keep your Veterans Day. You always have. Wake up, Judah, before the next generation die on the battlefield for these devils, and then their children allowed to suffer without wealth, without guidance, without protection. DFG, talk to you later. Bye now.